In 1948, a man named Osamu Dazai wrote a famous Japanese novel called No Longer Human, with the original story being adapted many different times, mainly with these adaptations coming in the form of manga. But in 2009, No Longer Human was adapted into a 4-episode anime OVA called Aoi Bungaku. Not only is this 4-episode OVA one of the best written anime that I have ever watched, I can also confidently say that it has to be one of the most depressing and dehumanizing animes ever made. We start off this story by meeting our main character, Yozu Oba, in a room surrounded by tons of men, with all of these men being unemployed, broke, and really just struggling to survive. These men are all planning a revolution against the Japanese government, as they feel like they have all been wronged by society and the world. And to give some context here, the reason this revolution is even happening in the story is because No Longer Human takes place during the 1930s, when the Great Global Depression was happening. And of course, during that time, many revolutions were happening not just in Japan, but all around the world. The revolutionist, or the man leading these revolutionary meetings, is named Hariki. Hariki is a struggling manga artist, so he holds these revolutionary meetings where he tries to get people to donate to his cause, aka just give him free money. And you're probably asking yourself, how does Hariki just convince these men to give his money over to him so easily? Well, Yozo pretends to be a bystander in the meetings, and every single time he makes a scene, he comes up with this bullshit story about how bad his life is and how his family is struggling to live and survive, and how everyone should unite together and band against the government. And of course, with all the men being desperate for solutions to their problems, they all pretty much donate their money thinking that they are donating it to a good cause, but of course, Hariki and Yozo are just stealing from these poor men. And already within the first 5 minutes of the first episode of this series, we have learned so much about our main character. 1, he will do anything to survive and fit into society. 2, he is naturally very good at manipulating people, which Yozo is also very charming and attractive, which definitely also helps him at manipulating people. And the 3rd and final one, Yozo is not a good and righteous person, and his actions within the first 5 minutes of us seeing him clearly demonstrates that. But going back to the revolution, where Hariki and Yozo are stealing money from these men. Right after Yozo and Hariki collect the money, the cops show up and chase Yozo down. While running away from the cops, Yozo stumbles across a bar, and in this bar there is a female hostess, which is basically just a female dancer. This hostess is named Sunako, and when Yozo walks into the bar, Sunako is getting rubbed up on by some creepy ass dude. So she uses Yozo as a scapegoat by pretending that he is her little brother and that she needs to urgently see him. And of course, Yozo kind of just decides to play along, which this massively helps out Yozo, as legit a minute or two later, the cop that was chasing Yozo down from the revolutionary meeting walks into the bar. And Yozo was like, oh shit, what am I gonna do? I'm screwed. But Sunako ends up repaying the favor by hiding Yozo under her dress and by lying to the cop and telling him that Yozo is not in the bar. After the cop leaves, Yozo and Sunako also leave the bar. And at this point in the story, they are really starting to get to know each other and like each other romantically, due to the fact that he's just so good looking. As I mentioned earlier, Yozo's good looks really do play a huge part in the story and play a huge part in him naturally just getting the favor of women. Yozo and Seneko are just walking home, getting to know each other, and decide that they want to go to Seneko's house. But before they make it to Seneko's house, somehow the cop familiar finds Yozo once again. And surprisingly enough, Seneko pushes and holds the cop back while Yozo can run away and escape. And while Yozo is running, he's just so shocked that someone he just met at a random bar would do such a kind and good thing for him. And he thinks to himself that Seneko is a truly strange and fascinating person, because Yozo truly doesn't understand humans one bit. He has this mindset that he is just different from everyone else, and that he is like some kind of beast or animal, and that he is not human, that he is different. And because of his mindset that he has, he isolates himself from everyone and never has genuine connections with people. And while Yozo is running away from the cops, we learn about his backstory and why he is currently the way he is in the story. Yozo comes from a very rich family, which is funny because when he's older, he's dirt heart broke. His father and his mother were pretty much absent from his life when he was a child. Yozo had multiple siblings, but of course he never managed to gain a connection with any of them. The only somewhat connection he developed as a child was with the housemaids that looked after his house. But they weren't too great either, as they would sexually assault Yozo on a regular basis. And keep in mind, this was when he was a kid, probably like maybe 4 or 5 even, which is just kind of crazy and pretty disturbing. And because Yozo was so isolated and just kind of treated like garbage by his family and SA'd when he was little, Yozo ends up becoming just truly terrified of all humans, because of course with his past experiences, all being horrible with humans, he just kind of gains this mindset that all humans are evil creatures and they're selfish and they're just all gonna treat him badly, basically. That's why when Seniko basically puts her life on the line to stop this cop just for Yozo's sake, he's just perplexed. Like, he just doesn't understand why someone would do that, because he's never experienced that kind of kindness or generous act from anyone in his whole entire life. Of course, Yozo goes back for Seniko, finds her beaten up and lying on the side of the road, with Yozo helping Seniko back to her house, and then the two have sex. And this scene between the two is quite depressing, as Yozo talks about his life with him being a failed art student who was rejected by his family. So in Yozo's eyes, he truly does see himself as a failure. And because of that, he hates his life and just lives with shame. And the same goes for Seniko, with her being ashamed of her job and just honestly hating her life in general. Seniko is the first person in Yozo's 21 years of existence that he has ever formed a true, genuine connection with a human being, because Seniko is just as sad and depressed as he is. And because of that, Yozo can truly relate to her. But with Yozo and Seniko admitting to each other about just how horrible their lives really are and just how they're fed up with living, they decide to choose death, as that's the only option they have left, at least in their eyes. So they decide to go to Kamakura and just enjoy themselves for the day. Which in the anime, all of these scenes of them enjoying themselves in Kamakura are shaded red, or red is like the main color in those scenes, which is crazy good foreshadowing and just something that the original novel doesn't have compared to the anime adaptation. How Yozo and Seniko decide that they want to ultimately off themselves is by drowning themselves. So they decide to take sleeping pills, then decide to jump off a cliff into the ocean, where of course they would drown. So Seniko decides that she wants to jump first, but she struggles with getting the courage to jump off the cliff and asks Yozo just for a little push, just to give her some courage and help her overcome her fear of ultimately jumping. So Yozo does reluctantly decide to push Seniko off the cliff, and as Seniko is falling in legit slow motion, smiling to Yozo as she is falling to her death, Yozo just gets hit with this huge amount of guilt and grief. Like, he starts to see blood all over his hands, the ocean is turning red. Like, this is just not good at all. And he decides to still jump, and he still somehow survives, washed up on the shore, while Seniko did die. And Yozo finds himself in the hospital, and that's where episode 1 ends. Gosh, that was a brutal first episode. Going into episode 2, we actually start off the episode by seeing more of Yozo's childhood years. When Yozo was in elementary school, he was the class clown. He always attempted to make everyone laugh and please everybody, because as I already mentioned, Yozo has been terrified of humans since he was a very, very young boy. So he would always put on a facade to please everybody. And all of Yozo's classmates absolutely loved him for that, except for one boy named Takaichi. This boy saw right through Yozo's facade. So just like everyone else, Yozo tries to be nice to Takaichi and make a friend out of him. And the opportunity for Yozo to get on Takaichi's good side presents itself as one day after school, it is just pouring rain and Takaichi has no way of getting home. So Yozo offers Takaichi to just come to his house instead, as it's not that far away from the school, and that way Takaichi has shelter. By the time they make it to his house, Takaichi has gained an ear infection as he is very sensitive to the rain. pain. So of course, Yozo decides to help Takaichi out and even cleans out his ears. And while Yozo is cleaning Takaichi's ears, he is talking to Takaichi, trying his best to get on his good side, and says to Takaichi, let's just be friends. And Takaichi, out of nowhere, says to Yozo that you're not fooling me, I know the type of person you really are, your true form is that of a monster. Which is kind of crazy for like a 10-year-old to say that to another 10-year-old, but this really like strikes a chord in Yozo, and from this point on, he kind of sees this monster-like figure, and of course, this monster figure is a representation of Yozo's true self, who he really is. And that is the end of the flashback, with Takaichi never showing up again at all in this story, at least in the anime version of the story. But Takaichi was the first and only person to truly see Yozo for what he actually is. And this fake friendship that Yozo had with Takaichi ends up being one of the most impactful relationships in Yozo's whole entire life. As without Yozo ever meeting Takaichi, there's a good chance that Yozo would have never saw himself as a monster and become even more detached from others and society as a whole when he gets older because of it. But then we are taken back to the present where Yozo is in the hospital still, and he's just a mess. He has just learned that Seneko has died. He has a mental breakdown because of it. He just is feeling all over the place, all these emotions. He also starts to become very triggered by blood or the color red. The red color represents Yozo's guilt for, pushing Seneko off the cliff, which in his eyes, he basically sees it as murder, like he basically killed her. But to make matters even worse, Yozo's dad is just like fully done with him at this point. Of course, he was already done with him, but at this point in time, he's like, yeah, no, I'm done with you. Like, you're a disappointment. You're a disgrace to our family. So he decides to pay and assign a man named the Flounder to watch over Yozo at all times. And the reason this old man is getting paid by Yozo's father to basically just stalk Yozo like 24/7 is because Yozo's dad is worried that Yozo is going to kill himself. And ultimately, if Yozo does kill himself, that will affect his family's reputation, which will affect his dad's reputation, as his dad is a very popular and successful congressman. After Yozo leaves the hospital, he goes to live with the Flounder, and the Flounder traps Yozo in this empty room where he can only leave to go to the washroom or to eat. So of course, Yozo starts to just lose his mind because it's a great idea to put a mentally ill person in a completely isolated room with legit jack shit to do. Yozo is seeing all kinds of monsters, his guilt is eating him alive, and it gets to the point where Yozo is like, screw this. He honestly just has nothing to lose at this point. So he jumps out of his window in the middle of the night and escapes the Flounder's house. He ends up going to Hariki's place the next morning, as he legit has nowhere else to go. When Yozo arrives, he interrupts an important meeting that Hariki is having with his manga editor, as Hariki's a professional manga artist, as I already mentioned, and Hariki has never really been a good friend to Yozo. He's always just used him for his money because of his rich background, and that's really the only reason why Hariki talks to Yozo. And Yozo, being the people pleaser that he is, just doesn't care that he's getting used, because Hariki really is the only friend that Yozo has. When Yozo arrives, Hariki just treats him like shit and jokes to his manga editor about how he attempted death with some random woman but failed. So after a little while of Yozo just getting treated like garbage in front of this random woman, he just straight up decides to leave Hariki's house without saying a word. He just gets up and walks out the door. And the woman, aka Hariki's manga editor, being the good and kind person that she is, chases after Yozo and offers him to stay at her house. And of course, Yozo agrees because, as I already mentioned, he legit has nowhere else to go and he has completely hit rock bottom. Yozo goes to live with Shizuku and her daughter Shigeku, with Yozo becoming the man of the house basically, as Shizuku's husband passed away a couple of years ago. And surprisingly enough, Yozo actually fit really well into this family, with Shigeko coming to call Yozo daddy. Shizuku and Yozo started a romantic relationship together. Yozo would do all of the house chores, with Shizuku working to pay the bills. Yozo even becomes a mangaka, with Shizuku's connection connections. As I already mentioned, she is Horiki's manga editor, so she just became Yozo's manga editor pretty much. And he started making money to help support him and his new family. And for the first time in the story, we have seen Yozo actually be happy. We are seeing Yozo at a all-time high right now in his life. But even though Yozo is living this great life where he has a good family now and he has a job, he still can just not escape his mind and his thoughts. He still sees monsters and illusions all the time. And of course, he always sees that monster that represents him. No matter what Yozo does, no matter how Yozo lives his life, no matter how he feels, he just can't escape his true self at the end of the day. So after living with Shizuku and her daughter for around a year or so, I think, with all things just being good and dandy, Yozo starts to lose his mind because of course things just have to be even more depressing than they already were to begin with. He's seeing monsters nonstop now. When he first moved in with Shizuku, he wasn't really seeing monsters that much and he could kind of avoid them as Shizuku and her daughter would distract Yozo from his problems and his reality. But it wasn't too long before that just stopped being a distraction for him and he just went back to his old ways of thinkings and just seeing illusions and monsters pretty much all the time. He also went back to his old habits. He started drinking and smoking non-stop, as he would use alcohol and nicotine as distractions to escape his reality. Of course, Yozo befriended one of the bartenders at a local bar that he always goes to, and she let him stay at the bar frequently, and they would pretty much just have sex all the time whenever he was there. So Yozo's relationship with Shizuku was really on the back of his mind, and he quite frankly just doesn't care about Shizuku at all at this point in the story. As Yozo never loved Shizuku, he just used her for a place to stay and to have someone comfort him whenever he needed it. So with Yozo not having to rely on Shizuku anymore, naturally he just kind of stopped going to her house. And the only reason he would go to her house every once in a while was to see her daughter, Shigeko. I truly do believe that Yozo formed a very strong bond with Shigeko and truly did care about her. But when Yozo does eventually just break off all contact from Shizuku and her daughter, is when one day Yozo goes back to Shizuku's house to see Shigeko, and he has been gone for a couple of days at this point. So Shigeko asks him, "Why have you been away?" And Yozo just simply apologizes and basically just calls her his goddess. And Shigeko, being the little smartass that she is, says that she is not a goddess, as all the gods live up in the sky. And Yozo just kind of laughs it off. He thinks nothing of it, as so far this has just been a very normal conversation between the two. But then Shigeko says, if I could ask the gods for anything, it would be to have a real dad. And of course, this completely catches Yozo off guard because Yozo really did become her dad for a extended period of time. He did everything for her. He looked after her. He just did things that a dad would do for their daughter. But after saying her wish to Yozo, Shigeko continues to keep talking and asks Yozo if he killed a woman. Yozo just simply doesn't respond to this, and he simply just runs away. As in his eyes, Shigeko was someone he could just talk to. Someone who wouldn't judge him for his past actions and his past mistakes, just like all of the grown-ups and everyone else in his life. But the moment that Shigeko brings up talking about wanting a real dad and bringing up Yozo's past, this relationship between the two just completely shatters. As Yozo realizes that Shigeko is no different from any other grown-up or any other person in his life. No matter where Yozo goes, no matter who he talks to, no matter what he does, he will always be confronted and judged for his past actions. So Yozo hits rock bottom once again. He's abandoned the only family that he's ever really had. He's an alcoholic. One night when Yozo is on another drinking spree, he is just roaming around the streets. It is snowing and the weather is just very bad. So Yozo is kind of roaming this ghost town because no one in their right mind is going outside in this type of weather. So he's the only one out there. He's just exhausted of his life and honestly just existing, falling to the ground and just bawling his eyes out, when a girl suddenly appears, and Yozo knows this girl. Her name is Yoshiko. Her family owns a local smoke shop that Yozo would consistently go to, and he would always talk to Yoshiko. And every single time that he talked to Yoshiko, he was always drunk. So Yozo would never keep his composure. He would sometimes be rude or ask dirty questions, but Yoshiko would always be nice to Yozo no matter what. And now when Yozo is at his lowest once again, lying in the middle of the street wanting to give up up on his life, she appears like a beacon of hope. Yoshiko tells Yozo that he should get home and tries to help him. But Yozo just starts rambling about his life to her and tells her his life story and how he attempted to commit a double death with some random woman he met at a bar and how he really is just a monster, the worst of the worst. And just a quick side note, when Yozo is telling Yoshiko about his experience with Seniko, he remembers on the night that he pushed Seniko off the cliff that right when he pushed her, he threw up because he's just getting so overwhelmed from all the emotions he was feeling, and also not to mention how much guilt he was feeling at that moment as well. And that is why he ultimately survived and did not drown. So we finally got our answer to how Yozo lived that double death attempt when Seniko did not. But anyways, back to Yozo talking to Yoshiko. When Yozo is done rambling to Yoshiko about his horrible life, Yoshiko actually comes to think that Yozo is just lying out of his ass. And Yozo confirms to her, like, everything I just told you is real, like it actually happened to me. And she's like, nope, you're not fooling me. And she tells Yozo that he's probably just really good at making up stories, and once again tells him that he should go home before he catches a cold. And then she leaves. At that certain moment in time, Yoshiko became a beacon of hope for Yozo. Something so pure and kind that he could just never compare to her. Kind of like an angel, I guess you could say. And Yozo falls in love with her because of it. And this is the second time in the story that we have seen Yozo idolize someone or put someone on a pedestal because of their innocence and kindness. The first time being Shigeku, and the second time now being Yoshiko. We are now finally onto the last episode of this super depressing story, with episode 4 opening up with a time skip, with Yozo now being married to Yoshiko and them living in a house together. Yozo seems to be doing good again, with him writing his manga and it selling decently well. Yozo has quit smoking and drinking altogether, and him and Yoshiko really do seem to be happy. But of course, nothing good in this story has to be good or happy. It has to all be just bad and super depressing. As Hariki shows up to Yozo's new house, and it has been a couple of years since Yozo and Hariki have seen each other, with Yozo acknowledging how Hariki looks just totally different since the last time that he saw him. Hariki now has a shaved head when before he had a middle part, and Hariki was very cocky and just very outspoken to people, while now he seems very timid and even depressed. So Yozo tries to cheer him up and be nice, with him offering Hariki tea and telling Hariki about how he married and met Yoshiko. And they catch up just like friends do. But after talking for a while, Yozo asks Hariki why did he come searching for him. Hariki then tells Yozo that he ran into the Flounder, who was Yozo's old caretaker for a very short amount of time in episode 2. But the Flounder told Hariki that Yozo's dad had recently passed away, and Hariki felt like it was his responsibility to go and search for Yozo and tell him about his father's passing, as legit he knew no one else would. Hariki also says to Yozo that he should go back and pay a visit to the rest of his family and pay his due diligence to his father, as that's just the right thing to do. Yozo then breaks into laughter, with him saying, screw moral principles. I strayed away from moral principles a long time ago. We have seen it many times now where Yozo will kind of just laugh in a absurdly bad situation, and he does that because that is how he deals with distress. And when he's just feeling grief or heartbreak or just anything bad, that's how he kind of deals with it. And this is backed up, as right after Yozo is done laughing, he starts chugging alcohol. So obviously Yozo's not laughing because he's like, oh, my father died, that's funny. No, he's laughing because he's feeling so much distress right now about his father's death. Yozo chugs some more alcohol, then proceeds to throw it all up, with him gaslighting himself and saying that as long as he has Yoshiko, that is all he needs. And the reason I'm saying that Yozo is gaslighting himself here is because his father was really his only support system. Even though Yozo had a very, very bad relationship with his father, Yozo's father was still a safety net for Yozo, something for him to fall back on when he needed it. As we have seen it many times in the story now, like Yozo's father giving Yozo monthly allowance to survive on his own, even though his father rejected him after Yozo decided to go against his wishes of becoming becoming a business or congressman, or when Yozo attempted death with Seniko, and Yozo's father was the one to kind of get Yozo back on his feet after that whole incident. These examples and moments show us that Yozo's father never truly did abandon him, and Yozo knew that. So when Yozo is saying to himself that Yoshiko is the only person that he needs, that he doesn't need his father, he's just trying to convince himself that his father's passing is going to have no effect whatsoever on his life, when that simply just isn't true. So at the end of the day, Yozo knows deep down his father's death will greatly affect his life, but he's just trying to convince himself otherwise. Hariki, seeing Yozo throwing up and him being in this insane-like state, decides to go get water for Yozo and tell Yoshiko what is really happening upstairs. As Yoshiko really has no idea what's going on at the moment, as Yoshiko and Yozo's house is 2 floors, with Yozo and Hariki being upstairs and Yoshiko being downstairs. So as Hariki is going down the stairs to get Yoshiko, he sees Yoshiko being raped, which I'm talking about the R word here. You'll know what I'm talking about, but I obviously can't say that word on YouTube. So Yoshiko was being attacked by Yozo's manga editor. As when Hariki and Yozo were upstairs talking about Yozo's father who just passed away, Yozo's manga editor came to pick up Yozo's new work for the week and decided to take the opportunity to attack Yoshiko in the meantime. And you're probably thinking, oh, it's a good thing that Yozo's upstairs and not downstairs to see his wife being attacked by his own manga editor, because Yozo is already in a horrible state of mind. Oh shit. Because of course, the worst possible thing has to happen in this damn anime. As Yozo follows Hariki down the stairs and ends up seeing Yoshiko being attacked, and instead of helping her, he ends up just running back up the stairs like a scared little boy, bawling his eyes out. And the manga editor notices Hariki and Yozo watching him, so he gets scared and books it out the house. Hariki during all this is just stunned and shocked, and he doesn't know what to do. He goes to comfort Yozo for a couple of minutes and then tells him that he has to leave. And Yozo is like, Hariki, bro, you cannot leave me right now, especially with her. And the switch up is just crazy. As just 5 minutes earlier, Yozo was praising Yoshiko like a god, saying that all he needs in his life is her and that she is his angel. But going back to Hariki, Hariki tells Yozo that he enlisted into the army and that he needs to leave as he is getting deployed that night. And Yozo just clings to Hariki, begging him to stay, but Hariki eventually gets Yozo off of him and quietly just leaves the house. And that is the last time that we ever see Hariki in this story. Even though Hariki really was a piece of shit and just a horrible friend to Yozo, he was the only person in Yozo's life that Yozo could even consider calling a friend. After Hariki leaves, Yoshiko asks Yozo why. Why didn't you help me when I was being attacked by that man? So Yozo just looks at her and is like, what? Like, what do you mean me save you? And it's crazy that he says that because obviously Yozo should have helped Yoshiko in that moment. But instead he ran away and abandoned her when of course he should have helped her. But Yozo somehow sees himself as the victim in the situation. Yozo thinks that Yoshiko was cheating on him with his manga editor to get him a job as a mangaka and to just have his manga sell well, really. Of course, none of this actually happened, but just Yozo thinks it did and really just created this fake lie, fake scenario in his head to kind of use it as an excuse from running away from his wife that needed help, and to also paint himself as a victim and make himself just feel better as a whole about the whole situation. And at this moment in time, Yozo stopped putting Yoshiko on a pedestal like he was doing before, as now he sees her as this dirty, no longer pure, innocent goddess that Yozo originally fell in love with and saw her as before. And Yoshiko during all this is just shocked at what she's hearing and ends up crying because in her mind, she's probably thinking, is this really the same man that I decided to marry? And from this point onwards, she starts to see Yozo as a monster as well. So Yozo sees Yoshiko as a monster, but on the other hand, Yoshiko sees Yozo as a monster. And at this point in the story, I would say they officially both fell out of love for each other. But somehow, after all the shit that just happened between these two, they did not get a divorce. They didn't even take a break from just like seeing each other or living with each other. They legit keep living together and just act like nothing happened. And this goes as well as you would probably expect it to, with Yoshiko trying to off herself by overdosing on sleeping pills. But before she can, Yozo stops her and says to himself, things just can't go back to normal, can they? Then straight up admits to himself that he lacks things that other humans have, and says that he is no longer human. And the reason Yozo is saying that he is no longer human, which has to be one of the best title drops I have seen a anime have, by the way. Anyways, Yozo says this because at this point in the story, he has fully come to realize that he lacks something that other humans just naturally have. And of course, I'm talking about his inability to develop and gain genuine human connection with others. Because as humans, we naturally just gain connections and bonds to other humans. But of course, Yozo just can't, and we see this throughout the whole entire story, with this kind of being the core aspect of his character. But despite him not being able to, he still tries his absolute best to develop these connections by pleasing other people, trying his best to fit into social groups and just social norms. But no matter what he does, he just can never manage to develop or gain a natural or real bond with another human being. Dehumanization, the core aspect of Yozo's character. And we see it on full display during this scene. But Yozo just completely loses his shit. And he is never the same after this. Even though we've seen Yozo lose his mind and just go through so much horrible stuff at this point in the story, he always somehow manages to bounce back. But after this, he's pretty much just done. He's like not recovering from this. After stopping Yoshiko and having his whole entire little monologue, Yozo decides that he wants to die and attempts to overdose on the sleeping pills that Yoshiko just previously tried to consume a minute ago. Yozo lands himself in the hospital once again as he failed to off himself once again, which is I think the second or third time that Yozo has attempted to die but has just failed. But Yozo failed this time because Yoshiko was there and was able to get help in time to assist Yozo and stop his death. Yozo wakes up and overhears some people outside of his room. The flounder, Yoshiko, and the bartender that Yozo slept and lived with for a bit of time that I mentioned earlier in this video. The flounder recommends to the others that Yozo is put in a madhouse immediately, and also calls him a trash human being. But surprisingly enough, the bartender comes to stand up for Yozo, saying that he is a sensitive and kind soul, that he is the way he is, and he does the things that he does because of his bad habits, aka alcohol and just drinking and smoking and all that stuff. Which I really like that they added this scene in the show, because it really does show that not everyone saw Yozo as a monster or a garbage human being. In reality, most of the people that Yozo knew or came across, he probably had a somewhat positive impact on them, and they probably thought good of him and thought he was just a good, decent person. But from the audience point of view, since we follow Yozo so closely, seeing how he thinks and just following every single thing that he does, he really does seem like a monster in a sense. So just because of this one interaction between the bartender and the flounder, we get more layers and more complexity added to Yozo's character. But going back to their conversation, after they are finished arguing about Yozo, the next scene cuts to Yozo being gone from his hospital bed. So during the flounder and bartender's conversation, Yozo just straight up left, like he dipped out of that hoe. And he started just wandering all around the area that he lives in. And during this endless wandering that Yozo does, you can really just see just how bad of a state he is in mentally. Yozo ends up coming across a pharmacy with the pharmacist looking evil or like a devil of some kind, which the reason she looks this way is because she's about to offer Yozo morphine, which really does seem harmless, but Yozo ends up getting addicted to morphine, and it becomes his new way of escaping his reality. The anime doesn't directly say that Yozo does get addicted to morphine, but we do see him walk into the pharmacy, so I'm just gonna assume he does, because in the original novel, he does get addicted to morphine. After Yozo goes into the pharmacy to get the morphine, we cut to this dream-like world that's very vibrant and colorful, and in this dreamlike world, Yozo looks very frail. He is very skinny, his face looks very deformed, and he simply just doesn't look as attractive as he used to be. He ends up seeing and talking to the monster version of himself again. And instead of Yozo trying to run from it, this time he simply just says, "Oh, there you are." And he continues by saying, "From now on, we'll be together forever." And I personally think that in this certain scene, Yozo is not only accepting his true self and accepting accepting that this just is his life and that he just doesn't really give a shit about anything anymore. He's not worried about pleasing other people or fitting into society like he was before. He's just existing. Of course, Yozo could be this way now because of his new addiction, the morphine addiction. But even then, I would say he mainly is the way he is now just because of how much of a fucked up life he really has lived. And that is the ending of this super depressing and dehumanizing story. And what makes this story even more depressing than it already is the fact that most of the events that happen in this fictional story actually happened in real life. No Longer Human is a autobiography based on Osamu Dazai's life. Of course, No Longer Human is a fictional story with a lot of fictional elements and things in that story, but if you look into Osamu Dazai's life and the story of Yozo's life, there is a lot of terrifying similarities. Osamu Dazai was born in 1909 to a very wealthy family. His parents were pretty much absent from his whole entire life, and he was raised by his housemates. It is also speculated that Dazai was sexually assaulted multiple times by the housemaids when he was a very young boy. Because of his isolation and traumatic experiences that he faced as a child, he had a hard time developing connections with others and struggled with things like depression, major anxiety, and just many more issues. This is starting to sound very similar to a certain protagonist that I just yapped about for the past 30 minutes. Osamu Dazai was an art student who was rejected by his father. He attempted a double death by drowning with a random bar hostess that he met in 1930, where he was the only survivor. And I really could go on for a long ass time about the similarities, but you get the point, where it almost seems that No Longer Human is a diary of some kind, with Dazai recalling his life and telling his whole entire life story through the fictional character called Yozu Oba. So you really start to realize how much weight is just behind this story, where it goes from being a fictional story about a fictional character who has had just a horrible and just bad life to actually being based on a real person, which actually for the most part experienced everything that we see in the fictional story No Longer Human. And even though the story is just so sad, depressing, and tragic, the writing is just so damn good, and easily is one of the best representations that I have ever seen of dehumanization. I personally love the anime adaptation of the story because you can really experience Yozo's life, seeing him react to all these horrible things that are happening, seeing his struggles, and just seeing him go through this roller coaster of emotions through the screen just hits you so hard compared to reading something off of a piece of paper. But if there is anything to take away from No Longer Human, whether that be the anime adaptation or any of the manga adaptations or the original novel itself, it's that mental health and just being in a good and healthy state of mind is really damn important.